All right, we're going to animate the social media video, and I'm looking at the composite settings right now. We're doing 1080 by 1080, and this will be about 30 seconds. Well, not about, it will be 30 seconds. I'm setting my background to black, and next we're going to bring our files in. So I'll find all the files. I have my sound file, my logo, and my 4 photographs. I'll drop them into the comp window here, and I'm sorry, the project window. And we'll select one of the files first and drag it. You can drag it into the composition window or down into the timeline. Either one adds it to the timeline. And we'll resize these, and this is really where you start to lay out what you did in your comps in Illustrator or Photoshop, wherever you did your comps. You're starting to kind of design. Sometimes it's helpful to have a layout or a printout of your comps next to you so you can kind of see what everything looks like. In here we're going to do our first kind of fade, and what you'll do is you'll set the timeline, or I'm sorry, you'll set the keyframe first by clicking on the little clock next to opacity, and you see that puts a little blue, kind of a little blue diamond there, or a rhombus shape at the 0 mark. Move our timeline over and click again. We'll make sure that it's set to 100%. So for the first like second and a half there, or 2.5 seconds, it stays at 100%. We'll set our timeline marker. Looks like I set it here to about 5 seconds. And we're going to click again, and it puts another keyframe in there. We're going to drop our opacity to 0. So you see now as we scrub across, it starts to fade right about 2.5 seconds, and about 5 seconds it completely fades out or reduces the opacity. Now we'll bring in our second photograph, again following our comps in our storyline. Going to do the same thing. Click on the little stopwatch next to opacity. Move our timeline indicator there over. And while I had you initially click right there on to add a keyframe, if you just adjust the opacity, it'll drop a keyframe in for you. But we're just starting out, so I'd like to get you in the habit of clicking there to know where you're adding a keyframe and where you're not. So then we drop the opacity at the last keyframe, and you'll see that they transition together. One transitions in over the other, and this one fades out as well. This is also why we set the black background, so that it fades in and out of black and instead of white. I thought that gave it a better look. All I'm doing here is taking each photo and showing where it needs to appear in the timeline. It just cleans up your files a little bit, so you can simply click and drag on that long kind of light purple bar and get it to only show up where you need it to based on where your keyframes are. A little trick is if you hold your shift key down when you get close to the keyframe or get close to the timeline indicator, it will snap to it if you hold your shift key down. So I'm adding the third photo here, again looking at the comps that I made and where everything should be positioned. It's okay to make improvements on your design, which you usually have to do anyway because you think something will work well when you're comping it, and then when you get it in here and actually start animating it, it doesn't work so well. So you adjust it a little bit. That's fine. Just stick to your main message and the audience that you're trying to deliver that message for. So you can see there I dragged it across, holding shift, it snapped to that timeline indicator. So now I've transitioned 3 of the 4 main photos doing the same thing, setting the opacity first, and you set the keyframe first by clicking on that little stopwatch next to opacity. And then we'll set the second, click for another keyframe, and that's going to stay at 100 because we want it to stay solid for a while. And then we're going to drop the opacity in the last down to 0, and it will automatically build that fade for you. So now we'll scrub back through and look at how all 4 of them fade in and out. Oops, sorry, all 3 of them. I guess we don't have the 4th one in yet. I'm going to add the 4th photograph now. Drop that in, resize it. I like to position the layers so they are in the order descending from how they show up. Makes it easier, I think, to understand. The apple orchard.jpg is the first one that shows up, and then apples on a branch. Really, all I'm doing when I scrub back and forth here over and over is just getting a feel for how things look, where I should transition one photo to another, to keep the storyline the way I want it, to keep the message the way I want it, but also to give everyone viewing this enough time to see the photo. And I'm going to add, if you remember in the comps, I'm going to add text on top of this, so I also want to leave enough time to give them to read and then look at the photograph. So there's no magic to that. We're starting out with a 30-second video, so we kind of work backward from that, and you can kind of divide it up into 4, although the last photo I'm going to have stay for probably about 30-35% of the time, because I'm going to have text over that, but then also at the end, the logo will go over that as well. So that'll take up a little bit more time. Now here, if you watch, I'm doing the opacity, but before the opacity, we're going to do scale. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm setting the first keyframe and scaling it, and I'm also going to use position here too. So you click the little stopwatch, set a keyframe, move your time frame indicator over, and then move the picture after you set that keyframe, and it'll transition. So I'm going to do a couple different things here. It's going to scale it as it changes its position. So I'll let you watch this. And one thing I did forget to do as I was moving through here was to save, and I've gone probably farther than I should without saving. So I'll simply just do a save and label this as my After Effects. So now you can see as I scrub through, it transitions from the apple pie or the tart into the people sitting eating in the orchard. Then at the same time, it's going to change the scale and the position of that photograph as well, of the people sitting eating pie. So right here, it'll start to get a little bit larger, and move that over just a bit with the position and the scale. Here I'm just cleaning up again, showing where that first photo is going to show. holding my shift key down to let it snap to that timeline indicator, and you can start to see where all the photos show up. I'm also just scrubbing through. I do this quite often. Scrub through and back and through and back, and just make sure things are how you like it. You'll notice in each of the photographs there's about a 1.5-second overlap. That overlap allows one to fade out and the other to fade in at the same time, so you don't ever have a solid black background. You always see one of the photographs a little bit. I think that looks better as you transition. So here I've added the logo, and I went back to the beginning. So after I basically set up all the 4 photographs and faded them in and out of each other, set up where they're going to be in the 30-second frame, excuse me, I'm going to go back and start to add the little details. So I placed the logo in here. Again, I moved the layer up. This is just the Illustrator logo that was created in Illustrator. And I'm going to drop the opacity on this and scale it as well. So first we'll set the opacity by setting the first keyframe by clicking on that stopwatch, moving the timeline indicator over, setting another one so it shows up just full size, full strength, or full opacity. And then along with the first photograph, I'll have that fade in and out. So I'm going to drop the opacity here first. And then I'm going to reduce the size. I will say that I probably should have done this backward, or do the scale first, and then drop the opacity. That's why I went back and set the opacity back up to 100. And then we'll drop the opacity. Otherwise you can't see it scaling. So now you see that the logo scales at the same time as it drops its opacity after about 2.5 seconds. We're about right here. Now I'm going to add some type to this. Find the type tool up in the top there. We can do I guess we're going to do a shape first. And if you look at the storyboard that I created and the comps that I created, I have a branded, like the same color as their brand color red, going across the top. And that's where all the type will go. So I simply draw it. This is a lot like drawing vector in Illustrator. It gives you a shape under contents there. You see it in the timeline. It's a rectangle. And you have all the same controls you have with the photograph. So here, if I want to find that actual brand color, I have my logo open in Illustrator, or I guess I'll open my logo in Illustrator, and I'll get that color. I'm going to get the web color from that. So first I will click on something to get that red color. And just copy the hexadecimal web color from that. Then we'll bounce back over and we'll add that in there, and that gives me the brand color for the rectangle. once I set this rectangle, it can be used across all of the entire 30 seconds, which is nice. That'll be consistent as well. So I'll set my stroke to 0. I think it put a little bit of a stroke on there. So now we're going to scrub to the end of, well, I should say we're going to find the beginning point where I want that rectangle to show up. Because I don't want it in the beginning. I want it about right at the end of the logo fading out and the second picture coming in. All right, we're going to end part 1 here, and we'll pick up again right where we left off in the tutorial video part number 2.